our judges. So, the finalist judges, we have Rebecca Boltzmer over here. This is an AI ethics researcher at the University of Edinburgh who contributes to Canada's Digital Governance Standards Institute and is an expert in human-centered AI and responsible AI governance. Absolutely perfect for this competition. Next, we have Peter, and I'm terribly sorry to say I haven't heard you pronounce your last name. Is it Bacarita?
Baki Rita, correct.
Baki Rita, I was very close, who holds a JD from Stanford Law School, a PhD in philosophy from MIT, and a bachelor's in philosophy from Princeton. And I'll make the same joke I did last time. Why don't you leave some for the rest of us? And he works at the intersection of law, philosophy, and technology and has a philosophy camp. And in fact, Peter, do you want to just tell us where and when and the name of it?
Thank you so much. It's called Reason and Rationality. Go to Reason and Rationality, A-N-D, reasonandrationality.com. It's at Princeton and Swarthmore, second week of June, and then also in late July at Swarthmore. Early camp in Princeton in June, and then late July and Swarthmore come out for the Reason and Rationality camp. Thanks.
Fantastic. Yeah, it should be an amazing event. That's for, I believe, all school-age students. And so the final thing I'll mention before we get, and then Sam Delorme, who you know well, he's been here all day, but he is a PhD candidate at the in philosophy at the University of California, San Diego, specializing in free will and moral responsibility, which you just heard him discussing. He holds an honors BA and MA in philosophy from the University of British Columbia in Canada. So before we go on, I just want to say for all finalists, you are finalists here, but everyone who got into the final rounds from the quarterfinals on is welcome to come to the grand final competition of the TKEthics sort of season in the summer. There'll be more details coming out soon. It'll probably be a hybrid tournament, partly online, partly in person, also in California. So you can go to Peter's event and then stick around. Okay. Congratulations again. Well done. We're now going to start our screen share and begin our final round. If all team members could have their cameras on, I believe, yeah, it's looking good. We've got Spinoza and we've got Butler. Is everyone from your team back?
Sam, I'm going to take over. I'm going to monitor. You can just focus on note taking. Yeah. Or moderate.
Okay, cool. I think we are therefore good to go. And Zach, over to you.
All right, have an amazing round, everyone. I don't know who to pick for. Let's just go with Spinoza. Spinoza, heads or tails?
We'll go
Tails,
with head.
Okay.
Oh, uh-oh. Yeah, you decide.
Yeah, I'll go with head.
Heads? Okay, I heard heads. It is tails. So, Spinoza, Butler. Butler, would you like to present first or present second?
Present second, please. Thank you.
Okay, so Butler presenting second, Spinoza presenting first, and your case is fake views. And I will read this to everyone before I show the question. So, recent technological developments in artificial intelligence have enabled new techniques of manipulating images, audio, and video. Of particular concern among these is the ability to create and deploy AI-generated media, or deepfakes. Innovations in machine learning have greatly increased the availability and sophistication of fake audio and video clips, which make it possible to realistically depict people saying or doing things they never actually said or did. Deepfaking video footage for entertainment purposes may bring some interesting benefits. Recent examples have used deepfaking technology to create new fan fiction content based upon the film industry's CGI representations of older or deceased actors in some of its most popular films. A now viral video builds upon footage from Lucasfilm's 2016 Rogue One, a Star Wars story, and showcases lifelike and foreboding footage of franchise villain Grand Moff Tarkin, portrayed by Peter Cushing, who died in 1991. The video also shows a de-aged portrayal of a youthful Princess Leia Organa, one of Star Wars franchise's most beloved characters, portrayed by Carrie Fisher, who was in her late 50s at the time Rogue One was produced. Deepfake clips like these have delighted fans across the internet, and the YouTube creator who produced them has since been hired as a special effects artist at Lucasfilm. Given the fact that many citizens' information environments are already complicated by an increased frequency of speculation, misinformation, and motivated reasoning, some researchers worry that deepfakes will cause worsening truth decay by engaging citizens' cognitive biases in ways that open both individuals and groups to novel forms of exploitation, intimidation, and personal sabotage. Potential concerns about deepfakes range from questions about the accuracy of media portrayals to worries about the ability to convincingly put words into the digital mouths of high-profile public figures. In one recent case, documentary producer Morgan Neville admitted to commissioning a software company to create a synthetic video voice for the documentary's deceased subject, the late television star Anthony Bourdain. Neville did not disclose the presence of the AI-generated voice in the film, allowing viewers to believe that the voice was indeed Bourdain's own. Others worry about the more profound social and political implications, for example, of synthetic viral videos which falsely depict House Speaker Nancy Pelosi as visibly intoxicated during a press conference, or which have put words that were never actually said into the mouth of former President Barack Obama. Many worry about an environment in which we can no longer trust what we see with our own eyes. As philosopher Regina Rini suggests, we ought to think of images as more like testimony than perception. In other words, we should only trust a recording if we would trust the word of the person producing it. This is our case, and I will start the round. The question is, in the era of indistinguishable deepfakes, are we entering a post-truth era? How should ordinary citizens adjust? And Spinoza, you have 3 minutes to confer before giving your presentation.
Sir, can we have these things in the chat as well? Thank you.
The question?
Sir, can we have the questions in the chat as well? Thank you.
Yeah, there you go. All right, and that is conference time up. So, if everyone is ready, we are moving right into the presentation. And time starts now.
Good morning, at least good morning on our side to all the judges. And thank you so much for listening to this round of finals. And we also want to thank our discussion partners for being here for this really meaningful discussion on these two questions on are we entering post-truth era and how should ordinary citizens adjust? First, I'm going to start by giving a quick roadmap throughout our presentation. To answer these questions shortly, we believe that to some extent we are entering a post-truth era because deepfakes are indistinguishable, but we think that this could have multiple solutions. And then how should organized citizens adjust? Angela will come up and give from the perspective of education to ordinary citizens to government responsibility on how they should adjust. I will introduce by suggesting two ethical frameworks today's discussion should be based on. We believe that the two frameworks we should use is first epistemic ethics, and second is pragmatism. So why is this? Why are we using these two frameworks? We believe since this is the case about like erosion of truth in digital age, as deepfakes making it really difficult to distinguish, epistemic ethics is suitable because it emphasizes first the pursuit of truth, second critical thinking, and third responsibility in information consumption. While pragmatism complements by focusing on practical solutions for citizens in order to navigate this new media age on how we adjust. So we think that truth is not just about facts, but we want to clarify it's about the integrity of knowledge systems. For example, like AI generated journalism, like challenges traditional epistemic values, like people can no longer trust their senses. For example, the famous saying on seeing is believing is no longer reliable. And second, by applying pragmatism, we think that instead of rigid rules, adaptive solutions, like first, we need to concede that AI and journalism and other stuff is inevitable. Banning it is impractical. We want to clarify this. And second, we think that in order to solve this, we should have adaptable solutions like public education, etc. And from this point, I'll pass it on to Angela to expand on solution part.
We believe that combating post-truth sentiments require a combined effort of companies, governments, and citizens, as they are all parts where how the AI functions, right? So look from the citizens' perspective, we think the most important thing that should be talked about is education. There are 4 points I'd like to mention. First of all, it is about cross-checking information, which means the citizens will need to learn that they should not be relying on one sole source of information. If something seems questionable, they should first point out that this could be deepfake, and second, they should be checking multiple reputable sources. In this case, the government also should be required to label deepseek, should require companies to label certain videos as deepseek if they are indeed deepseek, and hold those who have committed crimes using them accountable. Second, upon digital literacy, we believe that developing digital literacy is absolutely key to understanding, for example, how AI, deepfakes, and algorithmic, for example, manipulation would work. That is essential to navigating the information ecosystem we have today. And we also believe in the power of engaging conversation instead of echo chambers, which is needed for the combination of help from social media companies, but also citizens, which means that we should not be reinforcing biases by showing us content that we always agree with, and citizens should also learn to stay informed about legal and policy changes. In which case, government websites should learn at least to know that they should not be faking misinformation, and they should be teaching citizens to use the correct legal and policy changes and teach them correctly. We'll move on to James.
Today, I shall present you a counter-argument based on pragmatism and the impacts, long-term and macro impacts of potentially blaming artificial intelligence for deepfakes, etc. We understand that artificial intelligence it's like a blade. You can use it right, you can use it wrong. The originally good intention of combating deepfakes and teaching people to be aware and to be pragmatic may mean that they are no longer able to use artificial intelligence to generate videos, photos, and other positive stuff, and overall have a devastating impact on artificial intelligence development. However, as we understand here, from a pragmatism and epistemic ethics perspective, the argument against combating tells you that it may prioritize only technological advancement over the more importantly, the cultivation of pragmatic abilities to really ensure the future. Under these circumstances, if we weigh up and down, we believe that telling citizens how to deal with these problems in the long run are much more important than understanding the possible and minimal influences to artificial intelligence. And thus, based on our two combining frameworks, our important data today, we have want to tell you that today we're entering a post-truth era, and we believe that ordinary citizens can be able to adjust accordingly. With all that in mind, thank you for being here. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you very much, Spinoza. We are now moving on. Butler, you have 1 minute to confer before giving your commentary, and that time starts now. So that is conference time up. And now we have a commentary from Butler, and that time starts now.
Awesome. Thank you so much to the other team for their presentation. We just have a couple questions, comments, some things we want to extend on. So the first thing that we'd like to ask is in terms of what specifically about deepfakes suggests that we may or may not be entering a post-truth era? Because clearly there are other technologies such as doctoring photos or just lying that suggest that we are able to obstruct truth and obstruct reality in certain ways. So what is about deepfakes or videos in particular that kind of suggests that we are now moving into this era, right? As you guys also suggested, like AI writing like journalist articles, right? I'm not sure if we would consider that necessarily entering a post-truth era, especially when we think that the acquisition of truth is a continued process and that perhaps there's no one objective truth to something existing. Perhaps this suggests that we're entering an era of more deception, but we were wondering on your distinction there. And now I'm going to pass it off to Conan.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jade. What I want to chat about next is on the expectation of individuals to check all of the sources that they view. Team A presents the idea of educating individuals. And while we think this is definitely plausible, we do think that it might not be possible to expect individuals to, let's say, check all of the sources that they view. Or the question of, is it possible to expect every individual to be perfectly knowledgeable? And I think this engages with their framework about pragmatism, right? That given the fact that it is so easy to fool individuals with deepfakes, and importantly, bad actors have a vested interest in making deepfakes as pernicious and real as possible, do governments perhaps have a greater role than citizens to play in ensuring that deepfakes are properly regulated? So are there other suggestions that we could have that do not simply involve education, given that education could often not work in the majority of instances? So for example, are there suggestions like slowing the development of deepfakes to begin with, restricting it at the core? We think that these are valuable questions to ask as well. I'll now turn it over to Kathy to conclude.
Okay, awesome. Thank you all for giving such great ideas and thoughts to this discussion. A final thing that we want to mention is the fact that are we able to actually say that we were in a truth era before deepfakes? And this is a question that Jade also brought up somewhat in her point. Look at the status quo right now. There's a lot of things such as echo chambers that are created by social media and bias within the news, etc., etc. All of these pose a question that the perception that we have right now in the current world without a lot of deepfakes being prevalent, is it one that where we can see a lot more truth than one in which deepfakes are actually created? Given that, we look forward to hearing all the insightful comments that Team A will be returning. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Butler, for the commentary. And now Spinoza, you have a 1 minute, 1 minute to confer before giving your response, and that minute starts now. Okay, so that is time. And now we have the response to commentary, 3 minutes, and that time starts right now.
We would really like to thank Team Butler for their really insightful commentary, which has led us to rethink about our case. So to kick off our reply, I would first like to start by defining what a post-truth era is, since I think that that kind of decides what we're going to say later on. So I think there are two aspects to it, right? So not only is a post-truth society one where subjective beliefs, emotions, personal opinions override variable fact, which is pretty obvious definition everyone can see. And James will talk about why deepfake is accelerating it specifically. But also, a post-truth era is one where truth is no longer the primary basis for public decision making, where people become like skeptical of everything, even real evidence. So this is sort of where deepfake will come in later. But just a really quick example of, like, for example, people not even believing the truth when they can't distinguish between truth and difference. That's also a really significant factor of post-truth era. I'll pass it on to my partner.
Thank you, Zia. My answer to Butler's first question about the deepfakes issue and the reason why it's so singled out in our case. Let's go back to one of our two frameworks, epistemic ethics. The primary moral issue here is the erosion of truth and public trust in information. That's not going to happen beforehand because what deepfake does is that it lowers the barrier, it lowers the things you have to put forward in order to get fake information. Previously, if you do photo editing, it's going to be much harder, and there's definitely less people that's willing and able to do that. Moreover, it requires more effort. In these cases, what deepfake does is actually it's talking about how truth is, in this case, not able to be differentiated. It's able to do things in the way that human does it, which means that here, for many people, truth is not just about the facts, but also the integrity of knowledge systems. And knowledge systems are destroyed by the involvement of artificial intelligence. I'll move on to Angela, and she'll answer the second question.
We thank the Butlers for their very insightful commentary. Their second question is the feasibility of our solutions, which include cross-checking and digital literacy. So we believe that we have already said, at least at the top of my part, that combating post-truth sentiments require a combined effort of companies, governments, and citizens. While this question indeed only asks how ordinary citizens should adjust, we believe that governments and companies have a very similar, if not more important, role to play in how we should be reducing this post-truth altogether, right? So we think cross-checking information is especially important in this age, especially when stuff like DeepSeek and all kinds of AI models are coming out and deepfake is also coming out. We think governments that will also need to help because not everyone has this kind of knowledge now, right? So that's why a lot of people get fooled. Governments should take action to distinguish deepfake from real content by using, for example, automatic labeling and mandating user-generated labels. And it is also not feasible to simply let government limit because something like deepfake is symmetrical. If people simply want to use it, they will not be able to stop it. Thank you.
That is time. Now moving on to, nice work, guys. Now moving on to judges' questions. And I believe the judges have already gotten a question order. So I'm going to let them take it away and start the questions now.
All right. Hello, Team Spinoza. Thank you for the lovely presentation. I'll ask a quick question so that we can have our lovely new judges to ask their questions. What I was wondering is that you give a lot of epistemic responsibilities to citizens to, learn more about laws, to educate themselves on the platforms that they're using, to seek information outside of their echo chambers. But it seems to me like part of the problem is that we're just overloaded with information. And so we have like too much work to do. And so giving us more work is maybe not going to help the problem. What do you think about as a potential solution, actually withdrawing from things like social media where a lot of these deepfakes will happen and just kind of receiving less information so that we can process the information that we do have?
Oh, thank you for your question.
Thank
Wait,
yeah.
James, do you want to
You're very
start?
good.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I
I'll
would
start.
first. Oh, okay, you go.
Um, my idea is that first and foremost, we need to talk about the feasibility of all the solutions we have here. Even though it's ethical, everything's ethical. However, the issue with epistemics is that the knowledge system that we have is destroyed. If artificial intelligence or if deepfake continuously polarizes the majority of people, one particular person withdrawing from social media is only avoiding the problem in society and doesn't change the overall micro situation for himself or herself or itself, whatever gender they identify with, because obviously they have to interact with other people. And in this case, even if they themselves choose to retreat from a micro perspective, they are not able to change the situation. On the macro one, it's even easier to understand the reason why society itself needs to wake up. Finally, we do concede a few things, and we also have other solutions regarding government intervention. We also have all these things Angela talked about in the two speeches. Yes.
Yeah, just to directly answer like the solution thing, we believe it's actually the burden of the government to do this and the burden of the company. For example, like specifically implementing like blockchain authentication, AI tools for deepfake detection, and maybe even government criminalizing malicious deepfake use like identity fraud, election interference, and social media should fact check it. This is how like ordinary citizens could gain more accurate information on their behalf instead of just loading everything for the ordinary citizen to distinguish. Like education should exist, but we don't want an overload to like an apathy to an extent like I don't care about what's true and what's false anymore. Um, I guess we're done answering the first question. Thank you.
All right. My question is actually for Spinoza, and I have a question about your idea for government-led labeling. If the government and companies control the labeling, how do we prevent them from abusing that power or for censorship or for personal or professional gain or political gain?
Does anyone else want to start us off? I can do a start. I can start everything. Well, my answer here is that the government already has power. So it's basically a symmetrical situation of the government being able to utilize many claims they have, for example, national security, and they use it to justify some of the things they do. For example, which deepfakes, how do we regulate them? How do we make sure the ordinary citizen is able to grasp what is generated by deepfake and what is not? A very simple solution I have in mind is requiring every single generated image and writing to make it explicit in a very explicit way, right? Like right on top of the writing or right on the right bottom corner of the image that it is generated by deepfake AI. And that is something that the government can put forward for national security concerns, for personal security concerns, but also from an ethics perspective, the obligations the government have when they sign the social contract with the citizens. In this case, I believe that considering the symmetricalness of the division of power, this is the best that we have in the solutions.
And I would just want to add one point on how we can ensure that the government doesn't overreach by labeling, because like the only instance where government can overreach is when they have control, like a restriction, right? But if we use labeling as an aid instead of a restriction, like labeling to inform, not to suppress, it could actually be better. Like it could inform people of like disclaimers, but they still have access to content. But the explicit block should actually be done by a third party, like an independent, non-governmental oversight party, to review and challenge and to block these wrongful labels in order to prevent government overreach.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, this is Peter. I guess I'll ask the last question. And my question is, are there things, or did you consider the possibility that in the new era that we're entering into, that despite the presence of deep fakes, there are other things that are happening at the same time? Some of those things are the results of the same technology or similar technologies like AI and the internet and so forth. And so there may be things going on that actually are making truth more central to our culture and to decision making. So, what do you say about the possibility that actually truth is becoming more important because of other changes that are happening in this era?
Sir, I wish to answer from a political theory perspective. I hope it doesn't deviate too much away from the framework we have. The rise of the far-right parties in our world today has meant that ultra-nationalism and ultra-culturalism, they are making a return. And when we think of the far right, we think of certain parties in World War II that started the war. And these parties, overall, in my personal opinion, and also because of the past things that they have done, they have less respect for truth and more respect for the ideologies that they wish to push forward. In this case, from a political theory perspective, I believe that truth from a political spectrum is also getting less important. It's also supplemented by the rise of deepfakes and artificial intelligence, as you correctly pointed out, and considering it from the possibility of pragmatism, we believe that ultimately we may have to concede that truth is not as important as we wish for it to be.
Right, yeah, we would just like to use a few seconds to thank all the judges for the questions. It was really insightful and made us think a lot about this.
All
Thank you
right,
very much.
Thank you.
that brings us to the end of the first round, first half of this heat. And with no further ado, we will move on to the next round. So the case for this round is intellectual property unplugged, and I will read it. Generative AI programs are not able to only create text, but many can also create images based on user prompts. AI image programs are able to do this because they have viewed, quote unquote, hundreds of thousands of paintings and photographs created by human artists that have been paired with descriptive tags. In doing so, they identify commonalities between these inputs, attach them to particular input tags, and thereby learn to produce an original output. The emergence of these visual AI programs has created new dilemmas for copyright law and intellectual property rights more broadly. Copyright law aims to protect an individual's intellectual creations, as opposed to their physical property like jewelry or a car. Though specific rules and their application vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, in general, copyright law protects original, often but not exclusively artistic, creations such as novels, paintings, songs, and poetry. The purpose of copyright has historically been twofold. First, it protects the creator from having their work used in contexts they do not approve of, for example, in the campaign of a politician they do not support. Second, it stops individuals from financially profiting off work that they did not create, for example, selling prints of another person's painting without their permission. However, generative AI programs may undermine this long-standing reasoning. Though AI images are technically original creations, their author is not a human being. As a result, some argue that AI images cannot receive copyright protections because such an entity does not have preferences for the use of its creations, nor does it receive any benefit by being financially compensated for their use. Others argue that the creator of an AI program should benefit from the artworks generated by that program. Like the work that an artist puts into creating a painting, the work that programmers put into writing code and testing the program entitles them to control over the artworks it generates and financial compensation when those artworks are used. Still others argue that the artists whose work the AI program was trained on should be given rights to any artwork the program generates. Without their original creations, the AI would have had no inputs on which it could train. Finally, there are those who argue that the individual who comes up with the inputs the text prompt that comes up with and inputs the text prompt that produces the artwork should receive copyright protections. Without their work to come up with these phrases, the AI would have no text inputs to turn into visual artworks. And Butler, your question is, you are a graphic artist who uses non-AI computer technology to design your work. A client fires you, and you discover they are using GPT to replicate your artistic style. Have they done anything wrong? Should the government protect you in this situation? I'll send that in the chat again. You have 3 minutes to confer, and that time starts now. All right, that is the end of conference time. Butler, you are up to give a 5-minute presentation, and that time starts now.
Fantastic. So first of all, it's an honor to be in the finals, and we'd like to thank both the judges and the opposing team for listening and being here. To answer this question, we'll do 3 things. The first thing that we'll do is to establish property rights and why we think that property is an extension of our work and labor, and thus individuals should have the right to their own property. Second of all, we'll talk about the categorical imperative and why the government has the right to protect you. And then finally, we'll chat about a potential argument and why we think our case still stands. Firstly, I'd like to give the idea of intellectual property. And I think this idea is quite simple at its core. That property is an extension of our work and labor, that we ought to own the things that we reap, we ought to own the things that we create and have control over the products of our own labor. This is applicable in essentially any instance, whether that's physical property, owning a car, or owning a house, that you have control as to what you want to do with that property, or even in things like intellectual property, which is perhaps more applicable in this instance. That we think it is right to establish things like patents, as an example, because we think people should be able to profit and benefit off the work of their own labor. So how exactly does this transition into this case specifically, and why does this artist have this intellectual property? That I'll leave to Jade to expand on.
Awesome, thank you. So adding on to what Conan talked about, we think specifically when we're talking about things like artistic style, this requires a tremendous, tremendous amount of work, right? You have to see a lot of art, you have to experience this art, you have to refine and hone these skills, and presumably these skills were good enough that you were in fact hired to create this art in the first place. What this then suggests is this client is actively making money or benefiting off of your labor, and you don't benefit at all because unfortunately you have been fired. We think that's fundamentally unjust and they have done something wrong, and this is equivalent to an almost kind of theft. The second thing I want to talk about then is applying Kant's categorical imperative in terms of should the government protect you in this situation. What we think then is if we're talking about whether or not the government should protect you, we should universalize it, right? So if every single time a artist or anyone that creates anything works at a company and then the client, as soon as they get an idea of your artistic style, fires you, then there's no reason why anyone would want to create this art in the first place, right? People would want to steal for you continuously, and that would ultimately actually end in a kind of irrational outcome. What this then suggests is that the government should protect you in this situation because if such a thing were universalized, it would be unjust. Presumably, in this instance, in an individualized case, it is also incredibly unjustified, and the government should protect you through legal means, should try to reinstate your job back, or force that client to compensate you fairly for the effort that you've placed in terms of refining an artistic style. I would also like to add that just because you've used non-AI computer technology doesn't necessarily mean that this art is less yours or more computer generated, etc. We think that things like digital art require equally, if not more, effort and time to refine, and that it's fundamentally unfair to suggest that just because you used a computer to create this wonderful artistic style, the client has the right to take that work from you in order to profit from it and perhaps share this kind of technology with other people unjustifiably. With that, I'm going to pass it off to Kathy to kind of elaborate on a counter argument as well as conclude our presentation. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Jade. Previously, our response to the question was that AI art, when AI is not directly copying a huge part of the art, is that AI should be treated as a tool to create art, but is not an individual which is creating art. However, in cases like the one which is posed in the question, where AI takes a huge amount of inspiration from the artist's work to the point that they're basically directly copying from it, we would say that the AI needs to be protected against and that the client was in no wrong. A counter-argument to this idea is that AI is not a tool, because the artists in which the AI inspired their work off of should deserve credit as part of being referenced. However, our response to this question is as follows. Humans are also inspired by others' artworks without giving them credit. For example, look at Metamorphosis, which has inspired countless books throughout history, right? That means that since humans also inspire off of other humans in terms of artwork, as long as it's not directly copy and pasting to a massive degree, we would say that other people's artworks doesn't need to be referenced in terms of copyright or any credibility like that, because we also do the same thing with humans, and therefore it is analogous to AI. Thanks again for the prompt, and we look forward to the insights that TNA will add.
All right. Thank you very much for your presentation, Butler. Now, Spinoza, you have 1 minute to discuss and plan your commentary, and that time starts now. And that is conference time. So now we move on to Spinoza's commentary for 3 minutes, and that time begins now.
We love Team Butler's presentation, but we'd like to play devil's advocate just to prompt them into thinking a bit more in depth. What if we argue that the client has done nothing wrong? We believe that the people who enter the prompt to generate a generative AI deserves the copyright of the produced image. We have two reasons why we believe so. First, we think that a person using generative AI to produce a work is comparable to someone using a computer to type out a novel. In this case, the person is using a generative AI as a fundamental tool for itself. So in this case, the photo itself is not being drawn by the artist, but by the GPT. So the person is using this GPT as a tool. This is comparable, for example, to you typing out your original novel on a computer. You certainly did not manufacture the computer yourself. The computer is designed by probably people who come from America and probably produced by someone who come from South Asia or Southeast Asia or something. So essentially, what we're saying is that the client should be the one who should be receiving the copyright and has not infringed upon the rights of the graphic artist. And second, the other reason why we believe so is that imitation is simply how art works. Art styles are always derivative from those who the artist learned for. We do not know why this artist simply has the choice to say that, okay, my artistic style is my original artistic style. Since everyone who learns art have derived this art style from people who they have learned from, for example, I don't know, some really old ancient artists or something. These art is always a form of imitation, and therefore we have no way to say whether this artistic style is really, really unique in itself. Let's move on to James and Zia.
Okay, I would like to pose a few questions to our discussion partners. First, on the part of the artistic style, and second on Kant's categorical imperative, right? So first on artistic style, we want to ask, like, if the client uses AI to create quote unquote new artworks in the style of a fire artist, does the artist retain a claim to future artists that were never created by them? Like, how long does the span will continue? Like, what about other people who use their artworks? And second, on the universalized the rule that would destroy art creation, we want to ask, if an AI replaces artists but increases accessibility and affordability for consumers, would universalizing this rule always lead to a negative outcome? And what about its historical precedent? Because many artists borrowed styles from other artists throughout history. If their logic were applied to a past artistic movement like Impressionism, would that mean all derivative art is unethical and thus like non-universalizable and thus wrong? And lastly, should government compensation actually be the solution? Because how would the government determine which artists deserve compensation and which don't? Because it's all building off. How would this create like a bureaucratic system that limits artistic creation if they want to talk about how art should be limited? So thank you for the presentation.
Thank you, Spinoza, for your commentary. Now, Butler, you have 1 minute to confer before you give your response, and that minute starts now. Okay. Discussion time is up. Now we have the response. So time starts now.
Thank you, Team B, for all their insightful comments in our case, and we look forward to responding to them. Getting onto that then, this each will be structured into two parts. First, we will respond to the question whether AI art is meaningful, and then we will talk about accessibility. Conan will be doing the first part, and Jade will be doing the latter part. Given that, I'll pass the mic off to Conan.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Kathy. The first interesting point that we think Team A brings up is this idea of whether AI is used as a tool and the difference between simple imitation and straight up copying or inspiration. We think that in this specific example that we're presented with, this is a case where AI is used as straight up copying and not inspiration. It is taking the artwork of one individual, adding absolutely nothing to it, and therefore creating profit off of that. I want to note that this can also be applied into other examples. I cannot rephrase a book with an AI and then sell that with very similar themes and ideas and characters in bookstores for my profit. I cannot take a song, change the lyrics, but keep everything else the same and claim it as my own. Obviously, this is distinct from, let's say, taking inspiration from the theme of a book or taking inspiration from a certain lyric in a music. We think that that is particularly distinct. But in this case, the goal is straight up replication. The goal is imitation. No other kind of creation does this. Of course, there's other kinds of creation, like, for example, taking off the inspiration of other artists. But in this case, what this individual is doing is putting this artwork into GPT or other kinds of AI and prompting that AI to simply copy the artist entirely. And I think at that point is where a moral wrong has been committed. I'm going to pass it now on to Jay to finish us off. Thank you.
Yeah, so there's a couple miscellaneous things I'd like to add. First, I want to talk about their analogy in terms of you typing on a computer and that being equivalent to ChatGPT. We think these are very different scenarios in that you can still handwrite a novel and the novel would be similar quality with similar themes, but ChatGPT cannot do that without further input, right? In this case, ChatGPT cannot replicate your art style without literally copy and pasting your own photos into there. We say it is that exact imitation that is unjust and not necessarily AI as a whole. In terms of their idea on the categorical imperative, we think that accessibility is irrelevant in a world in which no one wants to create art because it will be stolen anyways. So there's actually no input for ChatGPT to have in the first place. Then I want to do with this idea of like art impressionists, right? People who like copy other people's art. We think there's a reason why people who copy the art of Vermeer or have similar melodies are looked down upon in society. It's because society as a whole does believe that if you are in fact heavily inspired by another artist, that in and of itself is also unjustified. We think art necessitates a certain level of human experience that ChatGPT simply does not have. Thank you.
Okay, that is time. And now we are moving on to judges' questions. These questions will be all for Butler, and the question order is going to be Sam, Peter, Rebecca. So Sam, why don't you start us off?
All right, here I am. Okay, thank you so much, Butler, for that super interesting conversation. And I'd like to say a little, or ask you to say a little bit more about this this categorical imperative condition that you have, which I think is very interesting. I think that the thought was that, if you universalize this kind of behavior, artists would no longer want to take on contracts in which they could reliably expect to get fired and get plagiarized and so on. But I worry that if you take into account the economic conditions of those artists and the fact that they don't have very much leverage, they don't have a ton of other opportunities for work, that it might still be worth it for them to take those contracts on, even if they know they're going to get exploited. It seems to me like a lot of labor is in fact exactly in this kind of position where they take on contracts that will lead to their being exploited because they don't have any kind of better options. Under that condition, the universalization argument wouldn't go through in the way that you anticipated.
Sure, yeah. I can start this off and then anyone can add on. We think that what will likely happen is not just that artists will be hesitant to take on contracts, but they're less likely to be artists in the first place. So in the original process of whether or not I want to create art, there's now a societal value that goes, if you do choose to become an artist and you do choose to sign on contracts, that work will be plagiarized, you won't make any money off of it, you'll be very sad and the government will not be able to protect you. We think that overall that actually just degrades the value of art in the first place. And more importantly, that the only people that can create art now are kind of like the same regurgitated, like uninteresting stuff, because that's, less low stakes. You won't get it stolen because ChatGPT already has some kind of conception of that in the first place.
Fantastic. I'll just finish this off because I think Jade has done most of the work here. I'd like to add on and say that I don't think that art is only about the artwork or the thing that is presented to the individual. It is also about the backstory behind it, right? So what did that author or artist have to go through in order to create the art? What are some other deeper meanings that this artist has tried to convey that was perhaps not clear in the original portrayal of such art? And we think that when you universalize this and simply less artists would want to create these kind of meaningful art and therefore either not be artists or degrade to very simple kinds of art in order to make a living, we think that has quite harmful consequences.
Okay, is it my turn to ask a question? So, along on the same thread, what would you say to somebody whose reaction was, "Oh, you're talking like the sky is falling," but markets are very good at providing solutions, and people want art, and people want commercial art, and the market will find a way to provide that commercial art to consumers, and perhaps that will involve artists and companies entering into different kinds of contracts or arrangements than they have in the past. But the market will find a way. The market will sort it out. What would you say to that?
I think I can start off and then once again someone can add on. I think specifically when we're talking about something with artists and the amount of power that a client might have over you, because obviously you're economically reliant on that, we think the market can't necessarily adjust for those kinds of things, which is why in some instances, right, if companies abuse their power, governments do in fact step in. So we think that perhaps it's true that the market will adjust, but the way in which that would end up looking like is you get a lot of really generic, unmeaningful art, and perhaps that will still make money or draw in views or things like that. We think that ultimately society is also about like having a good time and like viewing good art and having deep thinking about that art, and that's something that you can't necessarily have when all these artists believe that their work will be like just plagiarized immediately. And we think even if they do still choose to create art, it will much less likely be commercialized and accessible to like more people, I'd say.
Also, to add on to Jade's note, I want to note that AI art is such a radical change towards the industry that maybe the market, although it is very strong, might not be able to adapt. And a similar example we can draw to is like, for example, the downfall of telecommunication markets. So in the past, there was a lot of jobs that needed people to manually connect lines. But because we were able to develop phones and develop like wireless technology, a lot of these jobs actually just faded entirely. We think since AI art is such a radical change, it might have the same degree of effect on these markets.
All right, I'll ask the last question. Thank you for that. We talked a little bit about AI generated art, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on what legal protections should exist. This question talks about how the government should protect people in this situation. When we think about the legal protections, what do you think the balance is between preventing exploitation of artists without restricting artistic freedom or technological progress?
Sure, I can get us started. So obviously it's not possible to draw an exact line as to what kind of punishment should we give for every single scenario, given that AI art can span from something quite general as to, for example, taking inspiration from all of the available art versus just copying one type of art. But we think that a good place to start could be looking at copyright infringement laws that we already have in the status quo, the things that we punish people for if they use content protected by copyright, which art is copyrighted for, right? So I think that'd be a good place to start. Feel free to add on my teammates.
Awesome.
Yeah, for sure.
Sorry. Oh, yeah, I'll go ahead then. Sorry, just the last note as well. I think that although there is like no set criteria, I think we ought still err on the side of caution. Because if we do fail to protect the original artist, then we have done them a huge moral harm. And an analogy we can draw to this is, for example, imagine you are in a shooting range that is dimly lit and suddenly you see a shadow fly by. Even though you can't confirm that there is someone in front of you, you still ought stop shooting because the consequences of not erring on the side of caution will result in a heinous moral harm. The same thing happens and applies with AI art as well.
Did any of the other judges have another question to ask quick?
I just have a super quick comment, not question, sorry, but it's one thing I wanted to mention is that the categorical imperative thing that you mentioned is actually almost exactly analogous to the line case that Kant himself gives, where people would no longer have a reason to believe each other all the time if they believed that people were lying. And I just thought that was a cool little, I don't know if you've read the Kant or anything like that. I just thought it was super cool that the universalization strategy went almost the exact same way. So yeah.
That is our finals heat. What a tremendously good heat from both teams. We were very impressed. I'm sure the judges have a lot of very difficult thinking to do. Judges, take a few minutes right now to deliberate. And when you have an answer, put it into the heat sheet, input it manually, and then I will announce the winner before opening the floor to you guys to give some feedback to both teams. Peter, do you know where you are entering your score here?
Oh, I'm sorry. I put it on a spreadsheet, and somebody else also put it onto the spreadsheet. So I was pretty sure that I was
Gotcha. Could you
is that right?
here? Will you look at your Zoom message?
Okay, sorry. This is in chat.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay. So I can just reply right there.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
sorry about that.
No worries. No worries at all.
Okay.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so I now have the votes from all three of our judges. It obviously goes without saying that this was a tremendously high quality round, the highest quality Olympiad round I have personally witnessed, and it was my pleasure to witness it. All judges are going to give feedback, and without further ado, I'll just announce the outcome here. By 2-1 split decision, the winner is Butler. The winner is Butler. Both teams did a tremendous job, and now I'm going to open the floor to each of the judges to give a little bit of feedback to both teams and explain why they chose the way they chose. Sam, would you like to start that off?
For sure. So hey everyone, this was a wonderful round, and I thought it was super tight. And the playoffs, as it were, this whole day has been very high quality. And I echo what Zach said; it was definitely the best stuff that I've seen in this format. So I'm super impressed by that. I thought that both presentations, as in the main presentations, had really creative approaches. Almost everyone in the last couple days has talked about deontology or utilitarianism, and both of you sought, more specific approaches that suited the particular problem that you were faced with. And they were really difficult problems. I think Spinoza, asking about the post-truth era, that's a super difficult question to tackle. I think that talking about the epistemic context, of course, is extremely relevant. And I think that allowed you to answer the question in the way that was requested, which had specifically to do with, what the personal response should be of individual citizens. There was a bit of a trap there where we're very inclined to talk about what the government should do. And you clearly thought that the government should do a lot, but the epistemic ethics perspective allowed you to talk about the responsibility of individual citizens, which I think helped you not enter a kind of trap. And I thought that was great. I also thought that, once you got a little pushed on what post-truth meant, you gave a really great characterization of what post-truth was, which was like twofold. It was like facts over, or feelings over facts, and then the facts no longer inform the kind of the policy, which is actually a more refined description of post-truth than I would have come up with, and I've written about the subject. So I thought that was all great. I think that on the whole presentationally, in the first 5 minutes, you guys had so much packed in that you spoke very, very quickly, and it was sometimes a little difficult for me to pick up on all of the information that you were putting in there. And so I think that sometimes less is more in this regard. You can give a little more time to some features rather than others. And you're not going to be able to say everything in the one time. If you have something that you really want to fit in, maybe fit it in your commentary. So, as far as the presentation goes, those were my main uh, points. I think that also you sometimes, especially in the context of Peter's question, you didn't answer as you didn't take up as much of the spirit of the question as you could have. I think you kind of, Peter's question had to do with whether or not, there's ways in which truth is more central in this context. And I think, that's a hard question, but the best way of taking that question would be to say kind of a yes and say like, yeah, it's more central in these ways, but still we support our thesis in these other ways. I think that at the end of the day, you responded to that question just by kind of reaffirming your initial position. And so it wasn't a huge problem at all, but it was maybe a bit of a missed opportunity. Um, so overall, for Spinoza, I thought that you guys did a great job. I think you guys responded to the commentary super well, and your presentation was super rich. But there's a couple little details in presentation that I think could have gone a little better. I think that Butler's presentation had maybe a couple less of these little tweaks in presentation. I thought that just like Spinoza, you had a great creative normative approach, talking about the rights to the fruits of one's labor and so on. Um, and I thought that you signposted your presentation very well. You also invoked the categorical imperatives. Those are two different arguments, but you signpost them in a nice way. And I thought that the overall flow was quite strong. I also think that you responded to comments in a very strong way, especially the analogy that you were given in the commentary about the writing prompts versus writing in computers. I think that the clear counterexample to give to that point had to do with plagiarism, which you mentioned, right? And so that immediately diffuses some of the concern. So overall, I thought that you guys did very well. The only thing in the presentation that I didn't fully follow was actually the counter argument that you considered. As I was trying to track in my notes, I wasn't really able to reconstruct the thought there. So there's a hitch in that presentation. But for me, overall, it flowed very well, and I thought you guys did an excellent job.
I'll go next, and I echo a lot of what Sam said. He covered a lot of the things that I was going to cover as well. You both did exceptionally well. Like, I was so impressed through every member of your team and everything that you were saying. Spinoza, I especially liked your excellent philosophical counter arguments. I especially liked how you really kind of challenged and engaged with what it means for something to be true or real or original, particularly in the deepfake case. And your skepticism around the post-truth era, I think, was well argued and showed some really sort of sharp understanding. So that was well done. I also really liked your analogy of AI as a tool. I think it's a strong way to reframe the debate and shift the ethical burden away from AI itself. And I really, really liked that. Butler, excellent work. I especially liked your use, a lot of what Sam said as well. Kantian ethics, categorical imperatives. You did a really, really good job of using those concepts and showing a great grasp of sort of this moral consistency that I liked seeing throughout both of the presentations. Actually, you both did a really good job at that. I don't have a ton of notes. I thought you did a very, very good job. I think one of the minor things was just, again, trying to follow the amount of information that was coming so quickly and being able to trace it back. So again, what Sam said, sometimes that less is more to kind of reason it through and make sure everybody's staying with you. But overall, very, very well done to both teams. It was a really tough decision.
Yeah, so impressive. I thought everybody did a great job, and but I guess I'll say very briefly, Butler, I agree with Sam's comment that your signposting was very good. I was able to really trace through the thoughts, and it even because of the clarity of the presentation, we're able to even kind of with the Q&A kind of track and respond to things in the presentation very well. And Spinoza, I felt like Spinoza got better as they went as it went along. I agree with Sam that the opening presentation was packing a lot into a small space, but I was very impressed with how Spinoza handled the questioning that they had to take on. I thought that was very articulate. And one thing I'll say from my I'm a lawyer, and I have to say that answering questions under this and doing presentations and answering questions under this kind of time pressure is so difficult. And I actually find in my own life and observing professionals who are lawyers that people, when they feel the time pressure, I've seen people crumble. I've seen $1 million lawyers who get paid millions of dollars a year, when they have too much to fit into a space, they collapse. They look like amateurs. So that is very, very difficult. And for you guys to be doing this at this level under that incredible time pressure, I think it's really really great to see. But I guess so the last thing I'll say about that is, because it is sort of a piece of advice, right? Is it's not advice that you can really use here, because here you are under time pressure, right? But as much as possible in life, you need to create an environment for yourself where you do not feel that, because otherwise your mind just explodes. I don't know. I don't know how you do that here. It's hard to do that here, but you have to try the best you can.
Thank
Good
you
job, guys.
so much, judges. Thank you so much, teams, for participating. Incredibly well done. Thank you for that rich feedback. And thank you to all the spectators as well who made today, well, everyone, just incredible contributions. And what a wonderful experience seeing you guys discuss such brilliant philosophy. Couldn't be more proud. And we are so excited. We hope you can make it in person, perhaps, and certainly online to the finals in August. And we hope to see you again. Zach, any last points from you?
Yeah, in terms of certificates and the like, and sort of further information about some of the stuff we've talked about today, the August final, the global AI debates, a big email will be sent out to everyone sometime within the next 48 hours. But beyond that, everyone who competed over the past 2 days should be really proud. We were so impressed, and we look forward to seeing you all at the next one.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, judges.
Ciao for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Fantastic work, competitors.
Thank you, everybody.